Welcome, boys and girls. Costin here with a discussion about some of the most important characters in the End Times events, and hopefully some of the most important characters in Lords of the End Times as well, if Creative Assembly is going to do those particular events that happen there justice. At number 5, we start with Arkhan the Black. Now, Arkhan the Black of the Tomb Kings, he's obviously going to be a Mortarch, and I do wonder how they're going to handle the Mortarchs. Is it going to be the case that we start with the Legendary Lord, we choose a Mortarch as a beginning character, and then we summon Nagash, or will we just be able to start with Nagash? I think it would be good if we had either option, or at the very least if we had the ability of starting with Nagash, and then starting with a second Legendary Lord as a Mortarch. And when we talk about Nagash, the single most important character that currently exists in the game, not whatever Creative Assembly is planning to add, but currently existing in the game is, of course, Arkhan the Black. The Loyalist, the one who has been with Nagash the longest, the one who has always been faithful to Nagash, and is still faithful, by the way, to him in Age of Sigmar. I'm not quite sure why he is loyal to Nagash, that's its own separate discussion, but suffice to say, Arkhan went through a lot of shit, and he genuinely, out of all of the undead characters, he represents loyalty. And loyalty is a rare currency among vampires and undead. I mean, we could always talk about Cetra, we could talk about Khalida, we could talk about Katep. Katep is himself very loyal to Cetra. But Arkhan being loyal to Nagash makes him a very interesting and compelling character that is certainly outside of the norm that we usually have with undead characters. Because he's not loyal to someone who deserves that loyalty, he's loyal to freaking Nagash. And I think it's going to be an interesting discussion point and an interesting character to see how he is going to be handled there. And he's also in the trailer, so is Manfred, so is Vlad, so are others in that specific trailer. My best guess as to how Creative Assembly is going to handle that, the reason they're making Neferata free to play is they're going to add Neferata as a character that you can play if you just own Warhammer free, and that would be a way of getting to summon Nagash if you own that specific DLC. It would also be a way for people who just own Warhammer free but haven't bought the DLC to get access to said undead characters. So Neferata being free to play means you don't have to own Warhammer 1, that means you don't have to own the Tomb Kings, and yet you still have access to Nagash if you buy that DLC pack. So I think that's the intent over there. With Arkhan, it's more so the case that you will have a Tomb King character, and he is certainly going to play a pivotal role in whatever Creative Assembly has cooked up with regards to Nagash. Now, here's the thing. His starting position is good in a lot of ways. He starts with 2 regions, he gets a third, he gets an entire province very quickly, he starts with an extra army capacity. That's all well and freaking great. The downside of it is these 2 ports. You might say, well, they give you growth, but it's not as good growth as it should be. And the fact that Tomb King structures don't give you as much... the fact that when you're playing the Tomb Kings, you do require Tomb King structures to really get ahead, kind of creates a constraint in his campaign. That's more of a Tomb King issue than an Arkhan issue. Arkhan is just really good. He has a Book of Nagash that's special to him. He gets an extra army capacity. In a lot of ways, he is the single best Legendary Lord of the Tomb Kings, at least given the current pacing of how campaigns are played in the game at the moment. We could talk about Cetra for a longer campaign. Definitely, Cetra is really, really good and the best from a long campaign standpoint, but where Arkhan shines is from the current pacing of the game. I am curious to see how Cetra will unfold, given everything that is going to happen, but that's a different discussion for a separate video. At number 4, we have Vlad von Carstein. And Vlad is a very different beast than what we have with regards to Arkhan. Nagash brought him back. He promised that he'd give him Isabella back. Nagash being Nagash, he failed to fulfill his end of the bargain, but Vlad is absolutely the embodiment of nobility in a campaign. Even though he's undead, he is genuinely noble, and I think a lot of fans would agree that if not for the fact that Karl Franz is the Emperor of the Empire, he would actually have made a much, much better Emperor than the vast majority of Emperors that have sat on that throne in Altdorf or Nuln. especially in the reign of the Free Emperors. That's one of the things to point out about it. One can disagree with certain aspects about Vlad, absolutely, because he's not exactly the most kind of people. But when you look at Vlad the Impaler, which certainly Vlad is based on, there's a reason why Vlad the Impaler is still popular in Romanian history. And there's a reason why so many people backed him to the hilt, because they believed in what he stood for. Vlad is actually kind of the better version of it, really, in a lot of different ways, when you consider the implications therein. But all the same, Vlad gets stuff done, and he actually has genuine moral values, which is not something you can say about Manfred, or you can say about pretty much anyone else around Nagash, including Arkhan. Like, Arkhan is loyal, but having values beyond just yourself or your master is something that only really Vlad genuinely has. I'm reminded of the Battle of Averheim in the end times. And so during the Battle of Averheim, Chaos, that was the last strong point of the Empire. It's where they made their last stand. Now, Karl Franz and the Bretonnians, who were on their side, they sent Grail Knights, or whatever, Pegasus Riders, Hippogriff Riders, regardless. They sent messengers asking for help from Nagash, and Nagash was like, no, and he killed them. Vlad, however, interestingly enough, he took Blood Knights with him, against Nagash's orders, I would like to say, and so that's something that says a lot about Vlad, and tried to help the city. He also tried to help Gelt. That didn't end up working out in a lot of different ways. Gelt got exiled. I mean, Gelt himself is kind of important because of the bastion that he built in the Empire, one around Sylvania, another one against Chaos. But Gelt, using necromancy, made them, well, persona non grata in the Empire, and the Cult of Sigmar basically abandoned the whole Bastion plan because of the person who had created it. Yeah, the Cult of Sigmar was not exactly winning prizes for intelligence back then, because the Bastion had been, it might have been built by Gelt, but it was powered by the Schools of Magic and the faith of the Cult of Sigmar. And it was really Vlad who tried multiple times in the end times to help the Empire. He tried to help them against Chaos. He fought several battles. He got screwed over by the undead tendency of backstabbing and screwing over people over. So that is definitely a problem. But I think this is one of those campaigns where I'm really curious what they're going to do with this one in the end times, because they are going to rework the undead. They're going to rework the vampire counts. They might rework the vampire coast. We don't know. They might improve the Tomb Kings, but we definitely know they're going to rework the vampire counts, and it's about bloody time, I would dare say. So the potential of this campaign is going to be immense. They might remove Isabella from the game, or just, if you're playing a Vlad campaign, you don't get her, and your goal is to try and get her with Nagash's aid. I don't know. Different options do exist. He's certainly in the trailer, so they do have something cooked up for him. We'll find out what that something is. At number 3, we have Emperor Karl Franz of the Empire. It makes sense. If you are going to have the end times, then Karl Franz, who played a pretty important role in the end times, trying to hold the Empire, trying to keep everything together, trying to stop Archaon, trying to stop the Skaven, and various other forces, would and should play a major role in the End Times DLC. Now, the irony is, I've talked about the kind of campaign changes that should be implemented for Karl Franz, but really, the mechanics that he has at the moment actually do serve him quite well for that. Sure, some things could be refined, but if they're going to do Valten, and I assume they will, then I imagine they're going to touch up on the Empire, specifically with regards to infantry, electric count state troopers, maybe some diplomacy changes, etc. But overall, Karl Franz, in terms of his unique capabilities, is really well positioned to be able to handle the kind of things that are going to happen in the end times. And that is good, like, especially with regards to Conclave of Light and Emperor of the Empire, Electric Count research. The overall research tree of the Empire is where things could be improved on, the regular units. And look, let me explain something about the Empire. The issue that the Empire has, on one hand, their infantry is too weak to be able to stand up to the hordes of chaos, so they are supposed to rely on range units. But the problem is, range units, especially gunpowder units, end up having certain issues. Huntsmen, gunmen, no iron inside. So what I would say is they need a stronger and firmer front line. Like, you can't tell me with a straight face the Halberdiers, which by the way are worse than Kislevi warriors in every singular way, are a tier 2 unit. I mean, I guess technically they are a tier 2 unit. Personally, I just don't use them and I go for a spearman with shields. I only go for tier 2 for the sake of a captain. So some changes need to happen in regards to unit recruitment. Like, greatswords should be a tier 2 unit, because armored Kossars are a tier 2 unit, and armored Kossars are, sure, they have their own issues, but in terms of morale, they absolutely do end up winning, especially because of by our blood, they end up winning compared to greatswords. But it is that kind of balancing aspect with regards to that. So yeah, I do believe greatswords should be tier 2, and we need a new tier 3 unit for the Empire. Melee infantry unit. Maybe something with Midland, that would make sense. Actually give us a solid enough front line earlier on in a campaign. And look, you have Caribur greatswords available, of course. You do have some units, Eldred's Guards and all that. But if you can get Eldred's Guards and Caribur greatswords, then suddenly you have to ask yourself the question, what is the value proposition of regular Empire infantry? I've seen many videos and many screenshots on Reddit and other places where people just don't bother with any Imperial infantry except greatswords, and only if they have a building slot for it. In fact, even captains themselves with their training are not necessarily considered important, because you can get engineers, you can get mages, you can get witch hunters, you can get, warrior priests for the sake of growth and casualty replenishment. So the Empire infantry dilemma is probably one of the things that I think Creative Assembly needs to solve. Otherwise, the Empire works pretty well, but it is that infantry question, and it is an infantry meta. You can talk about cavalry, you can talk about range units, you can talk about tanks, etc., but it is absolutely a game where at the moment having good solid infantry line holders are not necessarily the best damage dealers. You can look at High Elves. They don't have great damage dealers. I mean, yeah, sure, Sword Master of Hove, but their regular spearmen get shit done. That's not something you can say about the Empire with the exception of a couple of units, be it in terms of stats, armor, and even leadership. At number 2, we have Teclis. Now, Teclis is a very different situation than most other campaigns, because he should be a hero of the end times, but if you look at the things he did in the end times, he didn't exactly cover himself in glory. I've talked about the High Elves, I've talked about Teclis aplenty, so I'm not really going to repeat myself in this video. But I think it would be interesting if with Teclis during the end times we had choices. Like, one of the things I've always mentioned with Teclis for a very, very long time, what his campaign needs is a mission structure similar to Oxyatl. A lot of mods change the start position to Safri because it makes sense. He should start with Safri. He should be there, and then he should have choices. If you look at the lore of his end times, he kind of was there. And he was dealing with various things during Ulthuan and the time period. But he was also doing things around the world. So really, he should be the High Elven equivalent of Oxyatl. In fact, his entire campaign structure, the way it should work, well, Oxyatl's mechanics would fit him significantly better than his current mechanics do. Like, it just feels incomplete. Because yes, you do have Secrets of that White Tower like Gelt does, but you lack the kind of dynamic world traveler that Teclis is, I should point out. One of the features of his entire campaign, one of the features that should be there, and one of the features of him in the lore, is that Teclis goes around the world and helps various races out. He's a diplomat, he helps with training mages, and none of that is reflected in his current campaign structure. I mean, he has a jungle campaign, and that's because CA figured when Warhammer 2 came out that the way to represent Teclis would be to put him in Lustria, which didn't end up working because your diplomatic skill baseline failed due to the way the Vortex campaign ended up being. And that is the problem. And they never corrected that. Even now, at the moment in the game, they still haven't corrected that. Hopefully they will finally correct that and give Teclis his time to shine in the Lords of the End Times DLC. Is the question, are they going to do High Elves, Dark Elves, the Civil War there, the resolution to that, and the importance of those events, and as well as Wood Elves? Or are they going to do that in a separate pack? Because the first pack, Lords of the End Times, it's going to be Skaven, it's going to be Undead, it's going to be Vulcan. The second pack they might do as a follow-up could focus on Dark Elves, High Elves, not necessarily a High Elven rework, we already got one and it didn't work out so well, but further additions to that. But the Dark Elf rework, a Dark Elf DLC, or maybe just a Dark Elf Lord pack where they do certain changes to fit the End Times better, that could end up working out quite well. I guess we'll have to wait and see what CA decides to do and how they decide to do it. And that's not even touching on the subject of Grand Cafe either. And finally, at number 1, we have Archaon the Everchosen. I mean, if you're going to do an End Times DLC, and Creative Assembly has stated they are going to touch up on Archaon. How significantly they will do so is unclear, but there's significant levels of potential. There's even mods that do this. Like, when you're playing against Archaon, there is a mod that ensures that after he reaches a certain level, he confederates every single faction of the Warriors of Chaos. Maybe he should be able to confederate every faction of Chaos and bring them under his banner. That's something Creative Assembly has hinted at before, and it might be that Lords of the End Times is finally when we get it for Archaon. Because right now, he's just kind of a lesser version of Be'lakor, really. Like, Be'lakor is just much better in every single way. Especially when we think of the Gifts of Chaos. Be'lakor starts with one of each of them unlocked. Archaon has to research them, has to waste time. It is a slower burn campaign for a race that doesn't necessarily do slow burn very well, because Warriors of Chaos end up dominating the crap out of everyone in a longer campaign, and so having that early game flexibility makes for a funner, better campaign. And it is also a question, of course, like what happens with Be'lakor once they do improve Archaon. Pretty important discussion, and I think that's the one we should wait for more details, because I would like to point out it has been months since Creative Assembly has last talked about this. Now, I'm not sure exactly what's happening in the company, but it's been a radio silence for a very, very long time. I mean, obviously, early year, Easter, etc., it's always that case, but it is worthwhile to actually get communication with the player base, I would say. Costin here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. Stay tuned for more.